morning, folks. We're pleased to have you here this morning, you and your companions. I never saw so many dogs with things on them like that. Well, again, welcome, and I just wanted to remind everybody about the committee rules of decorum. Please address the chairman and at all times, and so we'll now have the roll call.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Eklund.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Schmid.
Here.
Representative Strock.
Here.
Chairman Winter.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, one thing I didn't mention was please have your cell phones turned down. We'll start off with Senate File 147. And I don't know if we have a presenter here. Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. I remember seeing you now. Please come forward, Senator Hutchings.
And we have an assistant here. And I'm not trying to sway you by all the cuteness, really.
No props allowed. Slide props.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Senator Lynn Hutchings here in Cheyenne. This is one of those bills that's gonna bring me a lot of pleasure getting passed. This is like amazing. Senator Barlow brought this to my attention and asked me would I run it, and I'm like, yeah. When it comes to dogs, I just love them. I have neighbors who have service dogs. So with that, we'll jump right in so you guys can get your breakfasts. This is an act relating to the protection and rights of blind and disabled persons, specifying that the rights and obligations applicable to service and assistance animals apply to service and assistant animals that are being trained. And we're increasing the penalties related to injuring or killing a service dog or assistance animal and providing for an effective date. With that, Mr. Chairman, we start off with our definitions as used in this article, what an assistance animal means. And this is important. An animal that works, provides assistance, or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability or provides emotional support, these are the key words, that alleviate or mitigate one or more identified symptoms or effects of a person's disability. And it's not the little lap dogs that people love. Those aren't the type we're talking about. Assistance animals shall include an animal, this is what we're adding, that is being trained to work, provide assistance, or perform tasks for the benefit of the person with a disability, or provide emotional support that alleviates one or more identified symptoms or effects of a person's disability. We're conforming to the national standards, ADA standards with the CFR 36104, 35104 as well. Our statutes have not been updated since 1977. So this is important to get all this updated. And then if, and people do, like to injure or harm service animals, we are upping the as a misdemeanor, upping the fine or prison time for less than 1 year and the fine of $5,000. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill.
Okay, thank you. Does the committee have any questions for Senator Hutchings? Okay, would your companion there care to address the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, committee. I am Michelle Warner. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Canines for Mobility here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Since our incorporation in 2012, We have made a difference in 57 lives of people with disabilities by providing a trained service dog for them. We are the only organization in Wyoming that is accredited by Assistance Dogs International. We train dogs to help someone who is blind or visually impaired or someone who has a physical disability. Currently, Wyoming is one of 3 states, and since I testified at the Senate committee, one of those states has already passed a service dog and training law, was Wisconsin. That means that it's only Wyoming and Hawaii who do not have a law on the books for service dogs in training. We have worked very hard to educate and to make aware the businesses and the public entities in this community that service dogs in training are adhered to the same standards as a certified working dog that is with a person with a disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides, as a federal law, anyone with a disability may be accompanied by an assistance dog, but the ADA does not give any rights to dogs that are being trained. The question is, and why all the states have made the accommodation, is that how are we to get these dogs trained for their person with a disability if we don't have access to take them in? I had sent each one of you the attachments of the Assistance Dog International to show that you know that Canines for Mobility is adhering to these standards, because our dogs have to maintain that training standards. Our trainers have to be trained well to understand that we do not allow bad behavior from our dogs in public. I know that there is some misconception that we're talking about little 8-week-old puppies taking out in public, and that is not what we are talking about. We do not take our dogs out in training until they are housebroken and have had all of their shots. So we're looking at 5 to 6 months of age when they're going out in public. But if any of you know dogs very well, you know that the sooner you introduce something to them, the less scarier it becomes. Can you imagine a person with a disability taking their dog to Walmart? I mean, it's a lot anyways. But the slick floors, the automatic doors, the shopping carts, if that dog had not already been exposed to that. Once again, we have been very lucky in this community that they have embraced us. Only a few businesses, not Wyoming-based, have said we cannot have access as trainers. But otherwise, most entities have welcomed us. But I think it's time to move and go ahead and put it on the books that we do have those rights to have these dogs out in training. And I don't see any negative effect from this bill. There is questions that what will happen to people that are faking it? Well, we passed the fake service dog law in 2017, and it hasn't stopped people from faking their service dog. I don't think that giving service dogs in training access is going to change that at all. What we need to do as an organization is to keep educating entities that they have a right to ask dogs that are not behaving to leave instead of being afraid of being sued. So knowing that, I ask that you would pass this so that we can get this out on the House floor and we can pass the service dogs in training to have access. I would like to introduce quickly one of our clients, Darlene and Scout. Scout is a 4-year-old balancing guide dog. This is her second dog from us. I have an 8-month-old puppy, as you can see. He's 8 months, and look how well behaved he is because he's been out training. He's been to doctor's offices, he's been to the hospital. And then Drago is with one of my trainers. He's 18 months old. He is being trained for a veteran that is using a wheelchair right now. So I'm happy to stand for questions if you have any.
Representative Eklund?
Mr. Chairman, in existing law that we have right now, have there been many cases or any cases where dogs have been willfully harmed by people? Because we're upping the penalty on it, and I'm curious how that's worked in the past with what we have.
Mr. Chairman, through you.
Go ahead.
Yes, we have had multiple dogs, and I know that Darlene's first dog and her had several encounters with little dogs that were yipping and biting at him. And if she can't see where she's going, to have another dog, even though they're small, biting, it could have distracted him enough that she could have become injured. We do have other dogs that we have had coming up to us while we were in training. And each time a dog has a negative reaction out there with a person who sometimes feels like it's their job to test our dogs and be like, come here, puppy, puppy, puppy. I am confident enough to turn around and be like, why are you doing that? Do you want to see me get hurt? But our clients are already fighting that anxiety of being out in public with a disability, now having to stand up for their dog. I think that if people understood how important it is, and I think that this bill would help say how important it is that we are not distracting dogs, we are not letting our pet dogs run up and hurt our dogs or distract our dogs, it would have a lot to say about maybe they would think twice about allowing that to happen.
Yes, Senator Hutchings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Eklund, I too have a neighbor who does train service dogs, and their dog has been attacked. And another lady that I attend church with, she has a service dog, she's blind, and she's spoken to me about animals that can be vicious or people that can be vicious as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Representative Provenza?
Thank you. I have a follow-up to that Representative Eklund's question. Have there been prosecutions then? Because what I'm hearing are that there's concerns, and I'm looking at the language, any person who knowingly, willfully, and without lawful cause, so it's already a crime. Has anyone been prosecuted for directing their animal to harm a service animal?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the local authorities have been unwilling to press charges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So part of my concern with making it a felony is that they will be even less likely to prosecute, because a felony charge, felony is a lot more serious. And so what we've heard, and I used to serve on the Judiciary Committee, what we've heard from prosecutors is if you make the penalty too stiff, then they don't want to prosecute. So if we're already having a problem with our prosecutors not willing to impose a misdemeanor offense, then my concern becomes, while you're trying to enhance the penalty to stop people from doing things, the reality is people they're going to do terrible things, unfortunately. But then you're tying the hands of your prosecutors who are not going to want to prosecute cases because it's now a felony. That's my concern with that.
Senator Hutchings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate Representative Provenza's question, and I think it is a good one. And it's commonsensical, because we make laws all the time that people don't follow. We all know that. It's still a misdemeanor. It's less than 1 year. And the $5,000 fine, which is sad, the $5,000 fine doesn't go to the victim, it goes to our schools and our roads. And that's the sad part of it. But yeah, part of it is trying to say, hey, if you do this is gonna be a stiff penalty. That's part of the raising of it. And the other thing is just common sense. This hasn't been touched in so many years. I think $5,000 is reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Provenza.
Yes. Any more questions? I have one.
Yes, sir.
It seems to me that this could be a problem, as Representative Provenza brought up. So does your organization try to do any public information out, put it out about your situation and the reasons why this bill might be, or the actions from this bill might be important that they understand? Are you doing any kind of education efforts?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do spend a lot of time doing community awareness and education for businesses and the community. We have a very active service, Facebook page and our website. So we do talk about this quite a bit. I have personally been asked to do education with transportation system, the Colorado and Wyoming health inspectors. I go to their conferences. So we are trying to put out there a lot of information about not only this bill, but in general, the things and challenges that our people with disabilities that have service animals do incur every day.
Well, it's pretty obvious we need to do at least that and probably more if we can to make people aware of the situation. In my limited abilities, I make the dog stay outside. And so, I think there's a lot of folks like me that think a dog's place is outdoors. And so they don't have much sympathy for a lot of this kind of activity. And so that's something that you need to change, I guess, or at least make people aware of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just out of curiosity, you said earlier that Hawaii and Wyoming are the only two states that don't have anything like this. The penalties that are in this bill, are they kind of in line with the other states or higher, lower?
Do you know the answer?
Flashing on me. Chairman Winter, Representative Schmidt, I had not thought to look that up. And what I'll do when I leave out of here, if this bill does pass out, I will get that information to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever had a dog biting or nipping at one of your service dogs and have to retrain that dog? I mean, you've got a lot of time invested in that dog, and is there a possibility that dog is not a service dog anymore? I mean, does it get that intense? And I would like to say that if this happens 2 or 3 times in a row with the same dog, I would like the police or sheriff to know that this was happening. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Yes, we have had to do some retraining of some dogs that have been, not only because they have been injured and had to get stitches, had to go to the veterinary clinic, but it also affects them mentally. If you can imagine a person that is using the dog for stability, another dog runs up, they're trying to keep their person safe, but also keep themselves safe. If that preservation kicks in, the person falls and now the dog feels responsible for that. We've had a dog that was unwilling to continue balancing their person because it was just too much responsibility and they had felt like they let their person down. So there's a lot of psychology involved in it too, as these working dogs are, we're selecting them for their work ethic, that they want to take care of their person and help their person. This is across many states. We do give preference to Wyoming residents, but we do place all over the United States. And it's happened quite a few different states. We've had some here. Darlene's first guide dog that we worked, we had to go work with that dog to build that dog's confidence back up because little dogs were running out and biting at his ankles and things like that. And so we also changed her route, and that's unfortunate that she could not go by those houses anymore because the dog would start shaking. And unfortunately, her dog also became reactive. And then he was like, well, I'm going to eat you before you eat me. And so we had to do quite a lot of behavior management for him in order to have him successfully work. Unfortunately, he did not work very much longer because he did get cancer. And we had to let him go, but we got her another dog as soon as we could. But thank you for that question.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Provenza.
Chairman. Are there civil penalties so can folks get civil penalties for something like this? So, because it seems like there's a lot of money also invested, right? And so if we have an altercation like this and there is harm that is caused to a service animal, can the owner of the other animal be sued?
Mr. Chairman, through you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, the Americans with Disabilities Act does put that if a person with a service dog, if that dog is injured or killed, or the person's animal injures or kills that dog, they have to pay for either the retraining or the replacement of that dog. And yes, each one of our dogs, we put $25,000 in, but we do not charge that much for our dogs. We just charge a donation fee for them.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator Hutchins.
Representative Provenza, if you wanted to add something like this in this bill, if you think it would help make it pass, I would love that for these, because when I did up the penalties, I wasn't thinking that this money was not going to the individual who's been harmed. And I was told 20,000 and up for these dogs. This is not a cheap venture. So if you'd like to, or maybe I can bring it again next year. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Representative Provenza?
Mr. Chairman, I guess to respond to that, I would want to do more research. I don't want to
Gotcha.
invoke a civil penalty on a bill right now. And I think that's something that we can talk about between now and the second reading. And I don't know the Americans with Disabilities Act service, like what their laws are. There's moving parts here that I don't think would be responsible for me to try and change in the middle of a committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I agree, but I just didn't know if you were ready to. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Senator. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to offer that maybe the first offense would be the misdemeanor, and the second offense, once they were confronted with the law enforcement, that they would let them know that the next offense is a felony. And I don't know if that would be a good amendment. I'm just throwing that out there. So whatever you think. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, I do agree with Representative Provenza. Let us think about it, and I'll be willing to run something next year or later. But if something does come up, just let me know if you can do it. But I would need to do a little bit more research on the civil penalties as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions for the, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the committee that if there are questions about the penalties and if we need to change any of that, I would hope that we could at least pass the part about the service dogs in training. And if we need to come back with the penalties, we'd be happy to help again with that next year. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any more questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here and your testimony.
Thank you.
so much. Do you see how well behaved your dog was? Just staring at her.
Okay, are there any state agencies here to testify? Seeing none, we'll open it up to public comment. Anybody would like to come up and comment on this dog bill? Okay. We do have an individual on Zoom. She's here? Okay,
My name's Adrienne Unerdl, Chairman Winter.
go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, committee. My name, like I said, is Adrienne Unerdl, and I am from Evanston, Wyoming. I am a person who lives with a disability. I specifically live with multiple sclerosis. And I am the one that kind of started looking into this because I know from the ADA I have the right to train my own service dog. But when I started looking into how to do that in the state of Wyoming, I discovered what Canines for Mobility and Senator Hutchings said, that we don't have rights for them. And so I reached out and said, hey, can we take a look at this and get this done? So what I want to do is I want to not restate anything that Canines for Mobility stated. I want to say that I am in support of this bill. I agree with everything that she's saying. I also agree with the fact that, you know, if you are looking at these penalties, they do need to be upped. They are in a line with certain states in the United States. I have a whole table that I have that lists all of these things, and Minnesota and Kansas specifically says basically, you know, you shall not be fined less than $500, but no more than $5,000. And some of them are giving up to even 2 years in jail. So I don't feel like the penalty that we're asking to be increased is excessive, and it seems to be in line with other states in the US. I just wanted to say that I really feel like this is very important because if I have to train when I want to train my own service dog, which is what I'm looking into, I would have to go to Utah at this point, which granted, I might be 3 miles from the border. However, I am 70 miles away from a place that I could take the dog to be trained. And that's a considerable expense and time instead of being able to train in my own community. And so when looking into doing just what Canines for Mobility did about having to ask people, it just makes more sense to make sure that everybody that needs this has that access. I know a lot of you are ranchers. I know that, yes, your dogs stay outside, but I also believe that you understand the value of a working dog. And that's what these dogs are. These dogs are technically considered a medical device. They are our lifeline. They provide us a way to interact with the world. They provide us a way to go out in public and be safe. If someone came up and took away somebody's wheelchair or somebody's cane or something like that, that would greatly impact that person being able to navigate the world. That dog is no different. That dog is very important to that handler. And that bond that the handler has with that dog is so crucial. And so being able to train your own would save me an expense that I just don't have the money. And I greatly appreciate what Canines Mobility does for our citizens and for other people with it. I just want to be able to take advantage, I guess, it's not advantage, but take part in the world and take part of the protections provided to me as a person with disabilities to be able to train my own dog that the ADA says I can do. But as of right now, Wyoming doesn't give me that same ability while I'm in training.
Okay.
I appreciate your time. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone have any questions for Adrian? Seeing none, thank you, ma'am, for being here. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay. So we can close public comment. So what is the pleasure of the committee?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second to move the bill forward. You have any discussion? Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this may go back to the panel that was up here before. When you're training the dogs and stuff like that, you know, you referenced going into hospitals and restaurants and all these other public facilities that are owned by sometimes private people and stuff like that. Do you run into resistance going into, say, a restaurant or into a lounge or something like that with an animal, and the owners resist that? They don't want you in there with that animal and things like that. How do you deal with that? I guess is my question.
Yes. Go ahead and respond when you're ready, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have tried educating is what we normally do. Most of Cheyenne is aware of who we are and what we are doing, and it's a very dog-friendly community. The people that we have had trouble with are other businesses that are not Cheyenne-based. There's a couple coffee shops, there's been some stores that have said, we know you're trainers and you don't have access here in Wyoming. If the person has a disability and that's their dog, they do have access, but we do not. So we have tried educating them. Most of the time, if we just leave and we say, thank you very much. We'd love to talk with you more about how we can get in here and do some training. And such as the hospital, we actually help them rewrite their service dog behavior for people to come in there because they were having a lot of fake service dogs come in there. So we were able to work with the administration at the hospital, and they were like, you are welcome to come in here. Just let us know when you're here. And obviously we're not going into surgical rooms and diagnostics and things like that. The person that gets the dog is going to have to go into things. But even the ADA doesn't allow dogs to go into surgery or any sterile environments, things like that. But once we have educated them, a majority of them will let us in, like I said, if they are a Wyoming-based entity. It's been other places that have not. And so we have chosen, after educating them, to not give them our money and spend our time there.
Okay. Any follow-up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was concerned with the private rights of individuals, who do not recognize this as and that was one question, and I think you cleared it up for me.
Thank you.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Representative Davis, I agree with you, and I believe Michelle does as well. If someone doesn't want you in their establishment, you can't force them to let you in there. And I do have one quick amendment that I forgot to add. If you guys would be willing to make this effective immediately, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Representative Eklund?
Go ahead and Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
because I'm glad you're back up. So, first of all, thank you for making it clear that these animals are very intelligent and how they're affected by everything we do. I've worked with a wide range of them, and all animals are smart. We just don't give them credit for it, but you did, and I appreciate that. So in the definition on page 2, we've broadened that definition of a service dog. And there are service dogs, according to this definition, they provide emotional support. Probably more of those than trained seeing eye dogs is what we used to call these animals. Have you thought about, I guess, what happens when you've got 2 service dogs, according to this definition, that get into a dog fight? And how is that resolved, and how would police deal with it? Do you have any scenarios, or has that discussion been had?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. We have had, unfortunately, it occurs at Walmart a lot, where we have had one of our dogs working or in training, and we've had other people that have a dog that's not in training. And Walmart is very good about that part. If there is one dog going after a dog, they usually come right away and they're like, your dog is not behaving, your dog is out. And so, again, the ADA says that if a dog is not behaving appropriately, they do not have access with their person. It's the person that has access with the dog. So the ADA says you have to excuse that person with the dog, offer for them to come back without their dog so that they can get whatever goods and services that they are. The ADA does, I brought a definition of the ADA so that we could refer to it if needed. When they are defining what a service dog does, in the very end, it says emotional support dogs are not protected under the ADA for sole comfort. They have to do a skill task. We do have we do not do PTSD dogs, but there are organizations that do. I'm an accreditation assessor for Assistance Dogs International, and I've been doing that for 20 years. I go all over the world to make sure organizations are training and placing dogs ethically. And one of those standards for training a dog for a psychiatric disability is that the dog must do a skill task, such as if the person becomes anxious, the dog applies pressure on their lap or licks them or does something like that. They can't just touch the dog and feel better. That is the definition of an emotional support animal, and they have no rights under the ADA, and now they took it away on the Fair Air Carrier Act. They still have it in housing, of course, but they do, and if necessary, we'd be happy to write some examples of what a service dog does. The ADA does refer to that saying, this dog does this, this, and this, and then they give examples of some things that dogs do. And I know that as people keep training dogs, there's so much more that they're doing that we don't, like diabetic alert and cancer alert and the hearing dogs. And there's just so many, the heart dropping or going increasing. I mean, there's so many things these dogs can do. that I'm afraid that if we start to define everything, we're going to have this huge paragraph on the end. And that's why some of the wording in the language in this is so that it reflects back on the same language as the ADA originally uses. I hope I answered your question.
Senator Hutchings?
Mr. Chairman, I was just responding, you try to keep things as short and sweet as possible, make the definitions as tight as you can, because like she said, our statutes could be this long, possibly with all the additions we can make to every law we create. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for the folks? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Representative Schmidt. Oh, Representative Provenza?
Are we, Mr. Chairman, are we ready to do amendments? The bill?
I believe so, yes.
I would like to move an amendment to strike, to take out the penalty language in here, and I'll give you my reasons why if I get a second. So I would essentially, we would take out the section 3513-206, not repeal it from statute, but just take out the amendments to that section of law. But I need a second so I can discuss it.
Could you repeat that, ma'am?
I'll second it. So the amendment would be to strike the new language on page 3. That is saying less than 1 year instead of 6 months and $5,000 instead of $750. And Representative Strzok seconded my motion, so I just want to explain.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So one of the issues, and I brought this up, my concern is that, one, if it's not being prosecuted now, then the concern is that when we up that, it won't be prosecuted. The other problem that I found when I looked into the statute, so I looked at the laws that we have now, and when you look at 3513-204, it's kind of a similar provision. So you have the language for 206 already, just anything that's not added. It's 6 months, $750. When you look at 3513-204, this is another law that's titled Additional Provisions on Use of Service Dogs Penalty. And this is for any blind, partially blind, deaf, hearing impaired person or other person with a disability who is a passenger or any common carrier airplane, and goes on and says that can have a service dog with them. But paragraph B says any person violating this section is subject to a fine not exceeding $750. So my concern then is that by doing this, then only under 206, we have a $5,000 fine. But if you are a blind, partially blind, deaf, hearing, or impaired person, in these circumstances, you only have a $750 fine. So they're not at all parallel. So I think there's a couple concerns with that. So I think the bill will have a better chance also upstairs if we aren't doing this additional thing. I want to make sure that these people get the rights that they need to do their job, and not muddy the water with something that might not honestly make sense with how our statutes are listed right now.
Okay. I think we ought to ask the folks what they thought about it.
It's your prerogative, Mr. Chairman.
Would you come forward and address that, please?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I appreciate what you're trying to do there. In an instance, it would make sense, but if you look at what we're trying to do, we start off with amending 3513-205, and then we go into 3513-206, which has the penalties for this particular instance. We're not talking about the trains or the planes and all that in this particular bill. So that's why the penalties were raised, because we're kind of just flowing from one section of the statute to the other, where you've gone 3513-204. If we need to change 3513-204, I say we can do that later. But I didn't have any problems in the Senate with the nice flow of this, just FYI. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do you have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate very much the diligence of looking at the previous bills that we have worked on to get protection for these dogs. I think I said it earlier that if there's any questions about the money part of that, I'm very happy to continue working on that with Senator Hutchings for next session. My biggest importance for coming forward was to get the service dogs in training.
Okay.
So whatever will make this bill pass, I would appreciate.
Okay, Representative Provenza, do you have any follow-up? Okay, Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to bring it to everybody's thoughts process that these dogs are worth $25,000. If you had a fender bender, you would want to be compensated for that fender bender. This is a considerable amount of money, and I would like to say, I would still like to have the amendment that you would have a misdemeanor the first time and the felony after that. And I would, let those people know that they're going to get a warning that this is the law. I mean, that's a lot of money. So that's all I'm like to.
Okay, Representative Banks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We heard testimony, this hasn't been updated since the 70s. We also heard testimony from the good Zoom person that this is consistent with what's done in other states. I think we passed the bill as is. I think that $5,000 is a good deterrence. I don't think that anybody, unfortunately, gets this fine reimbursed to them. But it's a deterrence. It says, hey, this is a $25,000 dog. If I let my dog attack and injure that, I'm going to be on the hook for this $5,000 penalty. So I think we keep the bill as it is. I don't think there's going to be any problems. There wasn't any problems with it in the other body. I think we can pass it the way it is. And so I don't see a need for this amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question to the bringer of the amendment. Are we apples to apples here? Here we've got what I'm assuming in 204, we're dealing with a animal that is already went through the training scenario, if I'm following that right. Does that make sense? And then this one is the training scenario. So do we have two different animals is my question.
Representative Provenza?
Woof.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, that's up to you to decide when you vote on the amendment. In my view, I think that there's just a concern that there is not, that it's incongruent in terms of penalties, which is just something that I flag anytime I'm looking at what we're doing in statutes, is just making sure our law is congruent. The other thing, and I stand by this, I think this is true. I've heard it multiple times from a previous prosecutor on our Judiciary Committee. If you raise that penalty too much and you make this too much of a penalty, prosecutors are less likely to use it. And it sounds like we're already having problems with our prosecutors using it. And the other question I have is, did we, when we wrote this statute in 35, should we have put something in our Title VI or somewhere else in statute? Because our prosecutors might not know necessarily that under their guidebooks that they're not looking for this, and they're saying, well, I don't see that it's a crime in Title VI, so why would I bring this to court, or why would the city prosecutor bring this in? So I have question about whether we need to move it. I don't know that we need to use this bill to do that, but it's a bigger conversation about how do we set up our statutes in law so that they work. And it sounds like penalty portion is not working. So I don't know that increasing it is what's going to fix it. And I don't know that that's also going to educate more people. I think us having this conversation is going to educate people. I think it's going to hit the news. And, I also, someone doesn't know what happens and maybe there's the potential that they end up having to spend more than 6 months and less than a year in jail, right? Without that education. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts. I understand the concern of the committee. But from a good governance standpoint, that's just where I'm coming from.
Representative Eklund?
So I'm a little neutral on the amendment, but we're in that part of the bill. And something I would like to say that in a civil action, which would be the only way you'd get compensation for the loss of one of these dogs, if this penalty, if the person that was harming the service dog in training or otherwise doesn't get fined for it, you're not going to have much of a chance in court anyway. We can add what we want as far as civil penalties to the bill. And you would not want the Ag Committee doing that. We're dangerous when it comes to the law. And I don't know what to say about the incongruent part of it, because again, we're dangerous. If we changed it in 3513-204
Yeah.
up to this, we might mess up the next law in the whole chain and have a chain reaction. So I'm still trying to think on what I want to do about this fine. I guess since you're up here, what do you think about leaving it the way it is for the time being? What'll help you most in this bill is redefining and broadening the definitions. And I think maybe that's what law enforcement hasn't had, maybe why they haven't cited people.
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, I'm agreeing with a lot of what everybody is saying. For me, the cleaner a bill can go to the committee of the whole, the better. I will be willing to work with Representative Provenza next year or, next session. And let's clean up some of these fines. Like I've said, this bill, this law hadn't been touched in so many years. Our focus was on this and then this. Don't know why we didn't back up and look at the planes and the trains and all that, because that wasn't our focus. So I say keep the plain thing, the main thing, keep the bill as clean as possible, except for the effective date, and let's move it forward, and I will work with her if she'd like to clean up those fines in 204. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is restitution that the court can give, so they can do some of that, whether it's going currently, so whether that's going to pay all of that or not is different, I don't know, but, restitution, there's a lot of moving parts in our laws that we don't see in our bills often.
Okay. Thank you, ladies.
I'm not gonna move.
Okay. You're wearing a trail in that rug, so you just better stay there. Thank you. Okay, any more questions from the committee? Or thoughts or ideas?
Question on the amendment.
Okay, question's been called for?
On the amendment.
Voice vote for this one.
On the
amendment.
on the amendment, yes. Yeah, so all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
We'll have a raising of the hands. All those in favor, raise their hand. And all opposed? So it's 5-4?
No, it's 4-4.
4-4, okay, so the amendment fails. So are you square, Mark?
What I understand is it's 4-4, and Representative Ottman didn't vote on the amendment, so I don't know.
It fails.
Right. So, okay. Yes, Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make this law effective immediately, after that amendment.
I'll second that.
Okay. motion made to make the law effective immediately, and it's been seconded by Representative Banks. Do you have that, Mark? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. So do we have any more discussion on it?
Question.
Okay, the question's been called for. You want to have a roll call?
We're voting on Senate File 147 with an amendment. Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Davis. Aye. Representative Eklund,
Aye.
Representative Johnson,
Aye.
Representative Ottman has voted aye. Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Schmidt,
Aye.
Representative Strock,
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
No.
The vote is 8-1. This would pass with amendment.
Okay.
Sort of. With the name.
Off we go. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We really appreciate your help.
Well, since I'm the chairman, I'm going to make a comment here. To Senator Hutchins, I just felt like with what you said before, that the bill was not quite ready for prime time. Yeah, well, I thought that was the impression I got. And so that's the main reason why I voted against it, but
Change your vote.
no, I'll just leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Change it to aye. No, it's ready.
Okay. Our next bill for consideration is Senate File 181. We have Senator Craigo here to explain the bill.
He was going to tell you to vote aye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barry Crago, Senate District 22, here today on Senate File 181, Eminent Domain Energy Collection Systems 2. For those of us that served on the Ag Committee during the interim, you remember this bill. It was one we worked as a committee. It's one we worked till the very end, and then I think we got to the end and maybe we're one vote short of bringing this one out, and we brought a different one out, which was sponsored but did not make it through your end of the legislature earlier this session. And so this was actually my preferred. Personally, this was the bill that I thought we should be bringing, and I'll explain why as we get into it. But so I brought it as a personal bill to address this eminent domain issue because we spent a lot of time working this, as those of us that are on those of you that were served on that interim committee. Really, to be honest, this is a private property rights bill. Currently, eminent domain on these types of projects is available under 126.815. There's no prohibition. At one point in time, there was a prohibition. There was a moratorium. We've tried to extend that moratorium to no avail. And so this bill really is sort of a middle of the road approach. It protects private property rights, but it does not prevent the use of eminent domain 100%. It puts some pretty high sideboards on the use of eminent domain, but does not make it illegal or prevent the use of it for wind or solar projects. So if you're wanting to completely prevent any of those projects ever being allowed through eminent domain, this is not your bill. This is a bill that we worked both with industry, both with landowners, and it was really the one that we thought addressed the majority of the concerns. Does it address everybody's concerns 100%? No, but it does protect private property rights, protects the private property rights of those over whose land the transmission lines might go. At the same time, it allows landowners who might want to put in one of these projects to have to be available, this option be available to them, but only in very limited circumstances. And we'll walk through that in the bill. And so if you have your bill in front of you, we did do some amendments from the original version from what we actually worked in joint ag this summer, and so that's why it's on a blue sheet. And I'll highlight those as we get to those. So walking through the bill, getting into the meat of it on page 2, we have a section there, 126.715, and that's just saying, because currently in statute in 126, in Title I, Chapter 26, in the 700 series, there are statutes relating, which are fairly new statutes relating to eminent domain and how compensation has to be provided. And so this is a section that says for these types of projects, you also have to refer to the new statute we're creating, which is 126.818. And so that's all that's saying is if you're looking in the statute, it's a cross-reference between existing law and the new law. 126.818 is where we say that for these types of projects, you can use eminent domain, but only in accordance with this statute. And that's really what this statute does, is that's what this bill would do, is provide the sideboards. And so looking to page 3, we get into those. And so subsection B says you can only use this statute to acquire eminent domain if you meet all of these conditions. And the first one is really the most important: negotiate and have finalized land use and compensation agreements. And there's 2 things here: that shall grant the person the right to occupy and use not less than 66% of the land upon which the energy collector system will be constructed, or with not less than 66% of the owners of the land upon which the energy collector system will be constructed, if not less than 3 landowners are involved in the potential condemnation action. So when we worked this in Ag Committee, those numbers were, that was an 85% threshold. And we knew when we were working this in committee, the math didn't quite work. And so what we're really trying to do with this language is say, if you have a collector line, a transmission line running from either a wind or solar project, this prevents one person from holding up the entire project. And that's really what this is set up to do, is so that the project, you have one landowner, and these aren't super long projects. The transmission lines you're usually talking 20, 30 miles at most. And you might have one landowner in there that says, I don't want you going over the top of me. Well, this bill would allow that to happen. But that's what this math is about, is really getting it down to the circumstance where one person can't hold up a project when 20 other people agree and want the project. And so that's what this math does. We worked that with industry across the hall when we worked it in the Senate. And this is the math we came up with. And I think it's better. It's a better version than what we did in the interim. Once you've reached that agreement, according to those terms, with the majority of the folks that would be affected by the project, you can then file a complaint. And that at the bottom, page 3, that's where we start talking about the complaint being filed in court. And in court, you would have to provide the terms and conditions of the agreement that you had reached with everyone else prior to filing the condemnation action against the one person. You have to provide those terms so that the court can look at those terms and use those terms to help it make a decision on what the appropriate compensation would be for the one person being condemned or one landowner. You'd have to verify that that the commercial facility constitutes a public use, which that's already in the statute. That's not new language. We're just transferring that over from current eminent domain language. And then subsection C, it says, for purposes of calculating compensation under this section, improvements to the property shall be included in its fair market value. And that was one of the concerns of our landowners. They feel like sometimes that doesn't happen. So that's language we had put in during the interim as well. If you read down, subsection D is sort of a savings clause. and requires the compensation to meet both the requirements of all the 700 series and 818, which 818 is a little more strict and provides a little, which is this particular bill, provides more protection for the landowner on the compensation side. Subsection E, moving to page 5. Subsection E deals with not necessarily existing transmission lines, but existing easements that are already out there. There's lots of these around Wyoming, for example, pipeline easements or other types of easements that can be sold. And one of the concerns of our landowners was, well, these, for example, in the pipelines is a great one because there's nothing above ground, right? And so the question was, well, can you use a pipeline easement and then stick a transmission line on top of that and be within the terms of that easement? And so we heard lots of testimony. For those of us who are on the committee, remember that this summer. What this does is address that concern so that you can't take an easement that was not intended for a transmission line and convert it to a transmission line without meeting all these requirements. And that's set forth there on subsection E. Subsection F on the bottom of page 5, and I think you might hear a request to pull this one out, and it's not the end of the world if that happens. This one has to do with notifying your county commissioners in your cities, because sometimes they don't know about this if they don't have zoning. It could happen without their knowledge. I think there might be some concern, and I'll let someone else talk about that, but that's not the most important part of this bill, I can tell you that. Moving to subsection G, and this was also one that's fairly important for landowners, and it's not part of current statute. And this one has to do with liability. And I think we've heard some of these other bills. I think there's been a bill through year end dealing with liability and what happens on, for example, on power lines, et cetera. And this sort of addresses that concern as well. And it requires that the easement talk about who's liable and who's not liable. And I think that's an important part of this. It doesn't seem like a law, but it's an important part of this, and it helps provide some protection for the landowners. Subsection 8. So this is who this bill does not apply to. So it does not apply to a public utility that has been granted a certificate of public convenience and necessity under 37.2.205. It also does not apply to an energy collector system associated with a commercial facility generating electricity that began servicing load or that began exporting energy from Wyoming before the effective date, which is July 1st, 2025. It's essentially a grandfather clause. We don't want to go in and mess with facilities or lines that have already been put in place and people have spent money on installing, et cetera. We're not trying to do that. We're really forward-looking with this particular piece of legislation. And so those are the carve-outs or the exceptions to the proposed legislation. The remainder on bottom of page 6, top of page 7, those are definitions which are out of statute already. Those are definitions that are in section 815 D already, and so we just transferred those over because we are also repealing 815 D pursuant to this legislation. And so we needed to put those definitions in here so that, since we will be repealing D if this passes into law. And then the rest is conforming. The rest of the proposed language is conforming language throughout the rest of the statute. And so that's, other than the repealer there at the very end, which is on line 14, page 9. The rest of that is, like I said, conforming language. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, that the committee may have.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for Senator Crago? Yes, Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Crago, could you expand a little bit on what the repealer, what the actions, the ramifications, I guess is the word. Thank you.
Yes, Senator, go ahead.
So 2 things, Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis. So 815D was the moratorium on these types of projects, the use of eminent domain. So there was a moratorium on the use of eminent domain for these types of projects. That expired in 2015, I believe. And so what this does is, and it also, that provision also had the definitions that I was just talking about that went into here. So essentially what we're saying is we don't need that language moratorium anymore, because now we're putting this language will control whether you can use eminent domain. If this were to pass into law, this bill would control whether you can use eminent domain on these types of projects. And so it would become unnecessary language, really would not serve a purpose anymore, especially with us moving, which is why it's important we're moving the definitions over.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Representative Eklund?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Craigo, it's hard to wrap my head around bills that evolve like this one has. But so what brought us on the original bill that we worked, what brought us from 85 down to 66? I'm guessing industry had a lot to do with that, but can you help me with that?
Senator?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, absolutely. So I think everybody, landowners, industry, and in particular, a couple of the committee members who live in a place where this stuff happens a lot, the math didn't add up. And so we were talking about when you, especially on the second part B, because what we're really trying to get to is a situation where one person can't essentially hold up the whole project. And so 66%, that's three landowners, for example, one person. That was the minimum. So if you have two parcels of land, this would not apply. And so that was the math. 85% didn't really work because when you started doing the math, we weren't getting down to the right percentage. And so this is a 1/3, 2/3, and that was actually the committee's recommendation. They did good work on it, and really it was, I think everyone, including landowner groups, industry groups, agreed that this was the better percentage. Now, they may not like it perfectly, but the math is right and it makes sense. And so that's where it came from. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Any more questions for Senator Craigo? Seeing none, thank you very much for your explanation. Any state agencies here to testify? Seeing none, we'll open it up to public comment. Yes, welcome. State your name and who you represent.
Morning. Good morning, Chairman Winter. Connor Nicholas, Bud Fallon Law Offices in Cheyenne. Many of you know our office and who we represent. We represent landowners. We're a law firm of landowners representing landowners. We're in full support of this bill. In fact, we worked very hard in working the language of this bill during the interim session, as well as it was on the other side of the floor. And so we are in full support of this bill. A few things I wanted to make comment on. There might be some opposition to the notice to counties. We think that notice to counties is very important. If we're allowing the state to intervene in these negotiations as they already are, the biggest thing a landowner has, the biggest ability a landowner has in negotiations to be able to walk away from the table. Eminent domain takes that ability away. And so if a person is not allowed to walk away from the table, the county should be aware of those things so they can protect the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens and address zoning issues or other issues that might be able to address a lot of the concerns that might be available. The savings clause in Section D is very important to us as well. Wyoming has some of the best eminent domain compensation laws in the country. And we want to ensure that we can incorporate those laws as well as I'd say the very well thought out clauses that were developed during the interim session. Finally, we are in support of the 66%. You guys know me. If we could have it 80%, I'd be know I'd be okay with the 80%. I think that 66% with the math as it was decided on the other side of the Senate committee makes sense, and we can be in support of that as well. With that being said, I'm available for questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Carl? Seeing none, thank you for coming and testifying. Mr. Magagna. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with Wyoming Stock Growers Association. Just a very brief history of this. The foundation of this bill as it is today was based on some language, some legislation that we worked on extensively with other interest groups clear back in 2010. That's when we had placed the moratorium on use of eminent domain for collector lines. The idea was never that that was going to be a permanent moratorium, but that we needed some time to develop some legislation. So we then proceeded to work with a number of interests and develop what has now become foundationally this bill at the 85% at that time. The only reason this didn't move forward then is because after that moratorium had been extended a second time, wind energy development just sort of ceased to be a major issue in Wyoming. So we had a period of time there, about a decade, during which there was no pressure to do anything. And then as wind energy's picked up significantly in recent years, that's what brought us back to looking at this. And it's clearly an effort to strike a balance. We're fundamentally support private property rights, but at some point the rights of one person can interfere with the rights of 15 or 20 other people. And this attempts to seek that balance in terms of location of collector lines for renewable energy systems. So we're very supportive of the bill as it is. There have been a couple of changes in the bill since the original version. There was a question earlier on the regard to the involvement of the counties. That's not something that we requested. We're fine with it, but it's not, from our perspective, it's not critical to the success of the bill. The fundamental components of the bill are the requirements that you reach the 66% of either the amount of land involved or of the landowners involved. And we think this is a bill that enables landowners to make their own decisions on this for the most part. But we've seen a scenario where a landowner with a very small length of a line crossing them would be able to prevent 20 other landowners from entering into an agreements that are lucrative to their interests. So that's the balance we're trying to seek here. We think this is a good bill. It was the bill we had anticipated that the Joint Ag Committee in the last interim was going to move forward, and we were frankly shocked when the committee voted at their final meeting to bring forward the complete prohibition and not to bring this bill forward. That one's off the table now, and we believe this one achieves the right balance. With that, Mr. Chairman, strongly support the bill as it is and would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Magagna? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Cindy Delancey. I'm a lawyer in Cheyenne, and I work for a law firm that represents industry in these transactions and does quite a few of these types of cases. I had hoped to have my colleague Jeff Pope here with me today, Mr. Chairman, but he's home in bed with the flu right now, so he wasn't even well enough to Zoom in to join us today. So I'll give it my best try here, but I really do appreciate and applaud the efforts of Senator Craigo and my colleagues that have previously spoken. In Wyoming, we do our best work when we work together. And it's vitally important that we have this balance of private property rights. And especially at a time where we're having a lot of policy considerations and discussions around revenue and property taxes, we need all the industry that we can get right now to kind of help grow the pie as how that pie is being allocated is shifting, particularly, in relation to our local governments. But I think that this bill is definitely better than where we started. I have a couple suggestions on how to increase and further refine and make sure that that balance for all parties remains to be discussed and looked at. But I can't help but come back to that, this bill continues to hunt for a problem. As was already testified, we worked really hard on this in 2010, and Wyoming has some of the best eminent domain laws in the country, period. And no one has yet to testify to who is abusing eminent domain or what's wrong and why we're having to make these changes. Just some data points for you as far as kind of the current landscape and the lay of the land here. But Wyoming has 25,000 producing oil and gas wells and associated infrastructure, 6 trona mines, dozens of wind facilities, and several solar projects. The Eminent Domain Act could apply to any of these projects. In the last 10 years, Wyoming Supreme Court has addressed 2 cases regarding the use of eminent domain. Neither one of those cases addressed this very topic related to energy collection systems. So even if you assume that there are more cases that were out there, in the court system, and more instances of someone threatening eminent condemnation exists, the use of eminent domain is still a tiny percentage of the possible instances of where this could be used. So again, from an industry perspective, we're not fixing a problem with this legislation. The only instance that we are aware of is where a public utility threatened eminent domain for everyone along a transmission line corridor. That's the only kind of anecdotal information that we've been aware, as far as what's been happening across our state. And if indeed that is the genesis to the need for this legislation, this bill in its current format doesn't do that because it exempts out the public utilities, the people with the monopolies this doesn't apply to. So if, again, that's kind of where I just wanted to flag that for this committee, knowing that if that is, the genesis of why we need to make these changes, we're not accomplishing it with this legislation. So just quickly, Mr. Chairman, if I could just walk you through some things where we think this bill would, some minor tweaks to the good work that Senator Craigo has been kind enough to do and bring this in a personal capacity. I'd like to draw your attention, Mr. Chairman, to page 4, line 16 is the first place where I think that we need to do a little cleanup as far as the language related to the word public use. To have the consistency with the existing statutes related to eminent domain located in Wyoming Statute 126-504A1, that word, we should be replacing public interest and necessity as opposed to using the word public use. There's an inconsistency if that word public use goes with what's already in the books. And I would suggest that that be a cleanup to make that uniformity. So, our courts and everybody looking and using these laws are operating from the same sheet of music. So that would be my first suggestion for an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Ma'am, could you repeat that?
Certainly. That's page 4,
Yes.
line 16. Substituting the words public interest and necessity and in place of the words public use. Great, Mr. Chairman, removing the word public use and inserting the words public interest and necessity. This brings it into conformity with existing statute located at 126-504A1. Now, I appreciate Mr. Chairman, moving on, I appreciate the comments from the previous speaker from the other law firm that we work with all the time on the other side of these equations, but we disagree with subsection D. As being a benefit. We actually see it as being a detriment because it's basically codifying a legislative set of a floor price as opposed to letting the appraisers and other available evidence in the process work as far as the compensation piece. So we just, again, wanted to flag that for the committee, Mr. Chairman, that this would be a significant departure from what is already the common practice already in statute. So again, that's a policy question that I guess this committee would have to make, but I would request that line D on page, or excuse me, subpart D on line 4, line 23, 22, 23, moving on to page 25, line 1 and 2, that be stricken from the legislation. Mr. Chairman, moving down to line 20 on page 5, which is where we see this 30-day notice to local governments. The testimony down the hall, Mr. Chairman, from local governments was that they didn't ask for this. They didn't feel it's necessary. The county commissioners and the municipalities under our current our eminent domain act, they really have no role in this process. And really, Mr. Chairman, all this is doing is just creating local public angst and creating another vehicle for screaming, not in my backyard type conversations to occur. And we just don't feel, this is, eminent domain is an option of last resort, not a starting point in Wyoming. And to further inflame and ignite, local conversations amongst local officials that really don't have any kind of statutory role in the process, we just feel is unnecessary, and would ask that line 20 through 23 on page 5, and then page 6, line 1 and 2 be deleted from this version based upon the testimony that was heard down the hall.
Chairman? Yes, may I interrupt for a minute? So, well, we just had testimony here that indicated that it was needed, so we'll sort through it, but go ahead and try to convince me more, but I can't see that it's a problem to notify the locals of what's going on in their yard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Eklund. There was direct testimony from county commissioners, is the testimony that I was referring to, saying that, knowing that they don't have really any role in the process. I think the testimony that you heard from Mr. Magagna as well as Senator Crago was that this wasn't an essential component of the bill if it was stricken by the committee. That's the testimony that I believe that was presented this morning. That they didn't have strong feelings if it went away from one way or the other. Now, the testimony that you did hear from my colleague, the other legal professional, is he would like to see that. But again, policy decision of the committee, further burdening people that really can't do anything in the process, I'm not sure is efficiency or good governance. So again, policy question for the decision, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to line 7, 8, and 9 on page 6, related to the liability provision, starting with the word "and," reclamation requirements pertaining to the condemner's use of the property. That is already, again, in statute in Wyoming 26504. So that is duplicative, and would ask that that would be considered to be deleted as well. So that is pretty much the suggestions, again, that I have to make this bill even better, that where, there could be support from a wider group. But again, the way that this bill is drafted, that it's been referred to as targeted towards wind and solar projects, that's not our reading of the people that do these cases all day long. The way that this bill, Energy Collector, is drafted, that it's not only wind and solar, but it would apply to nuclear, coal, and anything with an electric transmission component. So, again, if that is the public, policy considerations of this committee, that we want to make it harder and harder for our industries to be able, all industries, not just our renewable industries, to tie into electric transmission lines. Again, that's a policy choice of this committee and ultimately the body. But the way this is written, the net is thrown a little bit wider beyond just renewables. So I just wanted to flag that for the group. And I'm happy to answer any questions for you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee. But again, we know that this has been a work in progress, but we still rest on the fact that Wyoming has some of the best laws currently on the books related to this topic. We know it's an emotional topic, but this is actually, an option of last resort, not the starting point. And again, the people that are doing this are exempted out of this legislation. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman, would you say that what you're talking about in statute already, what we're trying to address is the private property issues here that we have heard from? And so I think that that's where, what I understand what you're saying, that it exists, but on behalf of the private property owners here, this is what we're trying to address, not the eminent domain that is already there. We want some special consideration here, and I think this bill does a good job of addressing what the intent of the bill is. That's my opinion on this.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, to your question about, the balancing of the private property interests, you're correct in the sense that putting, as we've worked through the math to make the math work a little easier, that is a component that is new to the existing framework. The questions and the points that I'm highlighting, Mr. Chairman and Representative Davis, is some places where we have some inconsistencies in this piece of legislation versus what is already on the books, trying to make a simple process. And, again, if the desire is to raise that burden, to change the math a little bit so we can address, having a holdout, that certainly is, what this bill does. My suggestions today, and I don't think there's disagreement from industry as far as balancing the rights among private property owners. My purpose of my testimony today is that there's some things in here where we can do a better job of making sure that there's not conflicting language in other parts of the statute, Representative Davis, as well as knowing that these matters are not being abused in this way because they're not being utilized. So until we have a situation where we actually have some concrete understanding that there is someone abusing the eminent domain process, we just don't necessarily know that this is really necessary at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Cindy?
Thank you,
Seeing
Mr.
none,
Chairman.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Okay, any other public comments? Okay, is Ken Clark on?
Karen Clark.
Okay. Mr. Clark, you're on. I guess it's Miss Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Karen Clark. I'm with the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. We support Senate File 181. We feel that this is a step in the right direction, and we certainly appreciate all of the work that has been put into the efforts to strengthen private property rights and limit eminent domain for energy collector systems. We support efforts like this that strike a balance with property rights and energy collector systems. Our member policy supports having at least 2/3 of the affected landowners willfully agree before the carrier can begin condemnation proceedings against the remaining affected landowners. Again, we feel this is a step in the right direction for protecting private property rights and are supportive of this bill. Thank you, and I would take any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Clark from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there any other public comment at this point? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. So what is the pleasure of the committee?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we move the bill forward. Mark, you have all the information. Okay, thank you. Discussion amongst the committee members. Representative Banks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to little moment of privilege here. I'd like to just express my appreciation for everybody who worked on this bill. I know the Bud Fallon Law Office did a tremendous amount of work through the interim on this bill and continue to help out. These three gentlemen I know spent a lot of time on this, and I think the way the bill sits now is how we should move it forward, and that's how I think we should proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Yes, Representative Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, so in reference to the idea that we're creating and solving a problem that doesn't exist, I think I'll dispute that, because it didn't go, the first case, or the first time I heard much about the need for this happened a couple counties north of us, and those people were threatened. The state was even brought into it. That's concerning to, the state agricultural committee. They've corrected a lot of the problems. It never went to eminent domain, but this, just the very threat of those people up there brought this out. And we had a moratorium for a short period of time, tried to do the same thing and ran into a lot of resistance. This is a compromise. And I support the bill. I'm not sure I want to strip out the part about the county commissioners. They weren't here to testify, but I think leaving them in, it's probably just as well. They're probably going to find out whether this provision's there or not, but I think the bill's probably fine the way it is. I'm supportive of it as is.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Any more discussion? Okay, question's been called for.
Voting on Senate File 181, no amendments, correct? Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Strzok.
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. This will pass.
Okay, thank you very much for everybody for being here. Yes, our meeting is